Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from Mark's 13th chapter. This chapter touches upon what is known as the end times, which is the theological term for the consummation of human history. So the beginning is known from the end by the creator and controller of time, who exists outside of time and in fact controls it. But we have to live with much of the mystery and the unfolding, and this is where the exercise of free agency or moral agency overlaps with predestination. And the end times is treated most extensively in the book of Revelation, but we do catch glimpses of it in the Gospels and the epistles, and even some in the New Testament, frequent references to the day of Yahweh. And the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are so named. It's a Greek term etymologically rooted in similarities of outlook, so much of the material is common to these three. And we can read of Matthew's account of, or version of the same discourse in the 24th chapter in the book which bears his name, and Luke's in the 21st chapter in the book which bears his name. But Mark was the earliest chronologically written of them, so much of his material forms the foundation for the other two Gospels. And towards the close of the 12th chapter, we witness them in the temple, where an impoverished widow gives a small amount of money, but a greater proportion of what she owned, a greater fraction of her net worth, than those sanctimonious folks who like to throw coins noisily to be noticed. And we read of this in Luke's 21st chapter, which forms the foundation. So we just want to bear in mind that they are in the temple when this discourse is delivered. And the opening verse reads, "And as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Teacher, see what stones and what buildings.'" He is Yahshua the Messiah. The disciple is unnamed. And the temple was truly a marvelous sight to behold, physically awesome. And the original temple had been constructed by Solomon, razed to the ground by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BM, reconstructed during under the leadership of Ezra, the great reformer, and additions and elaborations were added on by Herod the Great, who was the reigning ruler in the Roman province of Palestine when the Messiah was born. But anything in this world, as we read, anything that is visually stunning is not meant to last, and it is subject to change and decay and destruction. And Yahshua answering said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down." The accuracy of this prophecy was confirmed in the year 70 AD, when, in response to Jewish rebellions, the Romans crushed the subject city under the leadership of Vespasian, who was the emperor Titus, or Vespasian's son Titus, who became emperor, but was his son, the prince, when he did it. And so many of the I think Peter and Paul had expired shortly before then. They had been subjected to execution, but John lived to at least the year 96 AD, so this is a historically confirmed accurate prediction. "And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him separately, 'Say to us, when shall these be? And what shall be the sign when all this is going to be accomplished?'" So this sparks their curiosity. They want to know when. And as we read, as the discourse unfolds, it's not meant for us to know when. It's enough for us to know that it will happen and how it will happen, but we have to live with the mystery of when. And there's a very important purpose for this. We are to live with the mystery, and he gives us enough information so that we cannot be without hope, but not so much that we cannot live without faith. "And Yahshua began to say to them, 'Take heed that no one leads you astray.' So the potential to be deceived is incumbent upon, to deceive and be deceived is incumbent upon the human nature, which the Messiah knew intuitively, thoroughly, and fully. And so the end times, there's been false quacks and charlatans throughout the ages who have, I never understood the percentage in issuing false proclamations about this year when the Messiah will come, but we're still here, so it hasn't happened yet, and we don't know when it's going to happen. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am he, and they shall lead many astray. So this is a warning of false messiahs who have the pretensions and mask of the Messiah, but none of the substance, and they are able to deceive through the performance of miracles and artificial trickeries, but really they're not the authentic article. And when you hear of fightings and reports of fightings, do not be troubled. It has to take place, but the end is not yet. So human history is very much defined by the war, which is the negative relations between geopolitical entities which compete amongst themselves for greater resources and geopolitical positioning. And war has happened in almost every year of human history. And so history will unfold according to its course, but we can read of an accelerated, alarming acceleration of war as a prelude to the end times. And it has to take place. This is for a purpose, but the end is not yet. So hold on to your hats, because for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be earthquakes in various places, and there shall be scarcities of food, and disturbances. These are the beginnings of birth pains. So the geopolitical turmoil is going to be accompanied by the rise in natural disasters, and just in the previous century, there's been an acceleration of activity of earthquakes and natural disasters, which many interpret as a prelude or a portend to the end times, but we're still here, and famines of food and disturbances, so that means there's going to be commotion and imbalance and disequilibrium, and these are the beginnings of birth pains. So the end of human history is really the beginning of an eternal history without end. So everything in this world can and must come to pass, but that which awaits us will last forever. But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to the councils and to congregations. You shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a witness to them. So it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, and it has to get worse, and there's a purpose for our pain and trials. The furnace of affliction reveals faith, and it separates the fair-weather disciples from the authentic article who are able to withstand the pressure and endure the tribulation. And the good news has to be proclaimed first to all the nations. Now, with the collapse of the Soviet Empire, much of it had Christian roots, but there still is, in fact, portions of the world now, the Middle East, and the early 20th century, fully 20% of the Middle East was Christian. That number has since literally been decimated to 2%. They are an extinct breed and dying on the endangered species list, very much there. So the future of evangelism may have to be in the Middle East, whereas that of communism, which is official state policy of atheism, but it really communism spread, at least Russian communism or Soviet communism spread in a land with Christian roots. But the good news has to be preached to all the nations before this comes to pass, and we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close, but we still have progress to make. And when they lead you away and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand what you are to say, but whatever is given you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who are speaking, but the Ruach Kadesh. So this is a line of advice not to prepare speeches for when we're brought to bear witness and testimony of our faith before persecuting rulers, but it's an assurance that the words will be provided to us by the Ruach Kadesh, who will be, inasmuch as we abide in him, he abides in us, and those who are, in fact, authentic disciples will not have to worry about preparing what they are to say. And brother shall deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children shall rise against parents, and shall put them to death. So this is a division and destruction of the family, and we are currently witnessing the dissolution of the nuclear traditional family in America. But towards the end times, immediate families will be divided by themselves, and I think in Matthew, the 10th chapter in Matthew, somewhere in the range of the 30 verse, the range of the 30s verses wise, he says that the families will not accept many who profess the faith. And you shall be hated by all because of my name, but he who shall have endured to the end, he shall be saved. So this is a negative statement preceded by a positive one, and they will be hated not for anything they are in themselves, but because of who they are in the Messiah. And there is a power in that name for it is spoken ill of and for evil in all nations. And enduring to the end, now endure is a verb, and we tend to lose sight of that. A lot of people conceive endurance as passively accepting the providential overworkings, but we have to labor and do what we can in as much as we are able, not to be content to rest for the promise of the kingdom to come, but do what we can to bring the kingdom on earth. Thy will be done, thy kingdom come is not just an empty prayer, but a solemn duty and obligation of every Christian in every age. And when you see the abomination that lays waste, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, put up where it should not be, he who reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. So Daniel, he's referencing a prophecy by Daniel, who is one of the major prophets of the Old Testament. The abomination is, I believe, in the 11th chapter or the 9th chapter. He alludes to the 70 weeks, which the Messiah's birth perfectly coincides with. And he who reads, let him understand. That means that it's an imperative to understand and not to merely peruse cursory or superficially the content of this reading, but to really absorb, reflect, and apply. And those who are in Judah are going to flee to the mountains. So this is an international event of international scope and scale, but he's preaching to a parochially minded Jewish audience. And he who is in the housetop, let him not go down into the house, nor come in to take whatever out of his house. So the natural man's inclination when disaster is impending is to gather their possessions because the end is near, but he warns them against such folly because the destruction will be sudden and irrevocable. And he who is in the field, let him not go back to get his cloak. And woe to those who are pregnant and to those nursing children in those days. And pray that your flight does not take place in winter. So the event is inevitable, and there are certain disadvantaged circumstances one can be in when this event does occur. And he's cautioning them and better hope that it doesn't occur in winter. He doesn't say when it's going to come, but it might come in winter. For in those days there shall be distress, such as has not been from the beginning of creation, which Elohim created until this time, nor ever shall be. So the scale of the commotion will be unduplicated and unprecedented. There's never been anything like it, never will be again. It is the consummation of human history and a dramatic unfolding of providence, overworking and overlapping in touching the lives of everyone then living. And if the Master had not shortened those days, no flesh would have been saved. But because of the chosen one, whom he chose, he shortened the days. So in the book of Revelation, we read of a 7-year tribulation period during which time the anti-Messiah will reign. He'll initially assume global domination as a peacemaker, but then force the world to worship his image. But that's covered more extensively in the book of Revelation, but it could endure longer. But a 7-year period, now 7 in scriptural numerology is the divine number of perfection, and from the creation of the world in Genesis we read that the creative process was 7 days. So that's really the root of its origin as the divine number of perfection. and it's for their sake that he shortened the days. It could go on longer, but he is in control, and it's easy to lose sight of that in the midst of our trials, pressures, persecutions, and tribulations. And if anyone then says to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "Look there," do not believe it. This is a reiteration of the fifth verse, in that the propensity for deception will be prevalent given the circumstances of this momentous event, but he advises them to not believe the false prophets and false evangelists of the false Messiah. For false messiahs and false prophets shall rise and show signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. So the false Messiah will have enough of the characteristics of the Messiah, namely the performance of miracles, the ability to wield miracles. Now, a miracle of the satanic variety, the adversary is a counterfeit artist, and a miracle is purposed to stimulate our faith, not to deceive or promote the wielder of the miracle to advantaged money or prestige or anything of that nature. So don't be fooled by the ability to perform miracles. That is a call for discernment. And you, take heed. See, I have forewarned you all of it. So he's giving them advanced warning, and this is to posterity, as the disciples would not live to witness the age, though they did live with the expectation. The earliest Christians did, in fact, the early apostles lived with the expectation that he would return in their lifetimes. And that's something we should be mindful of too, because he could come tomorrow. But in all actuality, the tribulation must come before the event. But in those days, after that distress, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light. So there's going to be no source of natural light from the solar or lunar sources from which we traditionally derive our light. So it's going to be darkened now on the day of the crucifixion around noon. When he expired, the entire earth was enmeshed in darkness, and that's portend to the end times, which will be perhaps more extensive in duration. And the stars of the heaven shall fall, and the powers in the heavens shall be shaken. So even though the focal point of this event is earth and humans who inhabit it, it has ramifications. We tend to forget that Yahweh and Elohim is the master of heaven and the earth. So everything in the universe is subjected to his control, and we read here that the stars will fall into disarray. And then they shall see the son of Adam coming in the clouds with much power and esteem. So this is all a dramatic introduction to the one who is coming. This is the second coming of the Messiah. His first coming, he came as a lamb. The second coming, he's going to come as a lion to conquer, whereas the first, his entire reason for his mortal ministry was to be a sacrificial lamb. But the entire reason for his second coming is to establish the millennial reign of the last and final dispensation. And then he shall send his angels and assemble his chosen ones from the four winds, from the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of the heaven. This is again the scope of his dominion, touching the heavens and the earth. And so everyone, the angels are his beck and call, and they will perform the purpose for which they are called and commanded to perform. And learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches have already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So this is a self-evident statement of a familiar plant to the first century Palestinians. And so you also, when you see these taking place, know that it is near, at the door. The idea being of the established analogy is that natural unfoldings are premonitions to what is developing. So a plant reaching its potential, it has to undergo developmental phases, and so too with the end times in human history towards the winding down of the prelude to the end times. Truly I say to you, this generation shall by no means pass away till all this takes place. So this is one of the statements that skeptics and naysayers and scoffers from outside the ranks of the faith give to dispute the veracity of the scriptures, because on the surface value, at face value, it seems this generation, he's preaching to the apostles in the first generation, and all of them died living with the expectation of the second coming, but not seeing its end. The heavens and the earth shall pass away, but my word shall by no means pass away. So as we earlier mentioned with the temple, everything magnificent to behold in the earth is subject to decay, change, and corruption and death. It's designed to perish, but this word shall last forever and abide in it. So he who abides in the word abides for eternity. But concerning that day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels in the heavens, nor the Son, but only the Father. Now this is an interesting aspect of the incarnation, whereby the Messiah, being a divine being, assumed fully the flesh, and as such he was subjected to certain limitations about the exercise and scope and ability of his infinite divine attributes. So he wasn't he didn't have, strictly speaking, omniscient. He was the wisest man who ever walked the earth, but he didn't know all. And when in Acts 1:7 he returns in resurrected form and tells them not to concern themselves with the hour of the second coming. That knowledge is only held by the Father and is perhaps known. It's ultimately a speculative matter in the resurrected, fully divine Messiah. He may know now, but that's a mystery and ultimately a speculative matter. We're not going to dwell on that line of thought further. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. Now, the mysterious aspect of it demands that we be cognizant of the unfolding and machinations and developments as described in these verses. As a man going abroad, having left his house, and giving authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. So he uses a relatable analogy of a homeowner who is naturally protective of his property and would not entrust it to a faithless servant, but a faithful servant who has proven themselves would be entrusted to such a responsibility. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, or at midnight, or at the crowing of the cock, or in the morning. So the master didn't assign or give his servant any premonition of when he would return, but the faithful servant will not be caught treating the house as if it was their own, or partying or doing anything lewd or indecent on the master's property. Lest coming suddenly he should find you sleeping. So we can be lulled and sedated by the unfolding machinations of human history, convinced that the hour has not come, and since it has not come, it will not come. But that's when we put ourselves in the spiritually dangerous state of restfulness to that which truly demands the fullness of our attention and awareness. And what I say to you all, I say to all, watch. So we have everything we truly need to know about the unfolding of the end times here, so it is incumbent upon us to watch, and as we watch, we are to witness not just the unfolding of machinations, but witness to the good news to those who are enmeshed in darkness. We are to watch, wait, and work, and never lose sight of the fact that he could come tomorrow. So live each day as if he could come tomorrow, but live the rest of your life prepared that you might not live to see it. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.